Good afternoon, it's Joyful Hermit. I thought I might today just share a little bit about a few words about Catherine of Genoa. I've read through further introduction to the Purgatory and Purgation, her manuscripts, and just, all that has been gone through over the last 800 years in manuscripts to find the manuscripts that were the most accurate. And they found one called Manuscript D that they feel is the most accurate. But it's an understanding, a reminder that Catherine shared what God infused in her, but they didn't have tape recorders and things like that back then. So she would share what she understood from her, and would give that to her friends, and the friends would write it down. And in one case with the dialogue, Ettore Vernazza, this young student that was like a disciple, a student of hers, wrote down the information. Her spiritual director of about 10 years wrote her vita, her life. And just by the different styles of writing, it's not fully understood if, say, Ettore wrote all of one thing or the spiritual director wrote another. I've come to the conclusion, for my own use, of what God told Catherine, that it doesn't matter to me if the wording is just exact or however it is, or the style of writing. I'm grateful to have what they feel is the best and most cleanest or clearest translation, and that's this Manuscript D, and that's what I'm going to read in the rest of this book. And the actual Purgatory and Purgation is not that long, and I think if I share more of it with you, I'll just go over the overview of what God told her. But I think we pretty much went over it when I was doing these introductions, these different sections of the introduction that I had in 3 different videos, that I explained her doctrines that God gave her, the teachings that God gave her through the Holy Spirit. So I thought today I would just share now visits from my father, because it's from visits that I have had from people I've known, and I've shared before, like the stranger, the young man from war who came, and the Virgin Mary who came. But and there were others, a couple of cousins. I've shared with about one cousin, but I think I'll just focus on my dad and the times that he has come. And there have been times when he's just given a verbal message, a reminder, an instruction, and a help from the other side. But the first time I actually saw my dad after he had died was it was about maybe 6 weeks after he had passed away. And I was going to be in trying this community of hermits, and my mother had just been found to be ill. Her oxygen was low and stuff. She was getting tests to find out what was wrong. But I was going to tell my mother about me being in this community of hermits of St. Bruno. It's no longer a community. I was only in it about 11 months, not quite, a little over 11 months, not quite a year. And I didn't have good feelings about the structure of it for the woman who had started it. So I got out of it, and it did fall apart within 2 years of when it was formed. And it was an excellent idea. The woman who was starting it didn't get her everything in order that needed to be for other people to be approved by their diocese to be in this community. So Things like that. It's okay. I learned a lot in the 11 months. I gained a great deal through studying, and I thought the woman had a great idea. It just wasn't put together well enough, organized well enough for her vicar general and other bishops in England, where the woman was based, to really approve of it over a long period of time. But I learned a great deal from it. But I was getting ready to tell my mother that I was going to be in this order and that I would be wearing a habit. That was part of this order. You stayed in your own home and lived your hermit life in your own home, but the woman wanted all the hermits to be canonically approved. I didn't know at the time what all that entailed, and it worked out well that I decided against it, and it wasn't for me. And I didn't have enough trust then in the woman who was leading it. She wasn't obedient to her vicar general. I called England and talked with him and learned a lot. And I felt that was in order to do because I was dedicating my life to this. And sure enough, she hadn't been obedient in some things to her vicar general, and that made me uneasy. But she became very angry when she found out that I had called her vicar general to further check out before I totally gave myself over in vows. And she reacted with a great deal of anger. So I knew her pride was too much pride to be a director. And anyway, and it all fell apart within about a year and a half later. But I'd gotten out of it. But before I had, way back, I had told my mother. But my sister, my oldest sister, happened to be visiting my mother then, helping her, after our dad had died. And I told my sister first on the phone what I was going to be telling Mom. And my sister knew how my mother felt about Catholicism and that this was going to be hard on her. So my sister, who had always been protective, she'd always, stuck up for me with things and paved the way. She paved the way with my mother and my telling my mother about, being a hermit, being in this order, and at a certain point in time, I would wear a habit. My mother took it very well, thanks to my sister also helping in that process. But I was very, very concerned about disappointing my dad, who had died. And I remember weeping about it, that knowing how my dad felt about Catholicism when he was alive, and that I had very much disappointed him. And I felt that I had disappointed him through a marriage that I should have waited longer. Maybe it would have taken forever to find out all the lies that this man was in. It's hard to know if you're married to or going to marry a narcissistic sociopath because they lie so well. Some people don't find out for years all the lies that the person they were married to. But anyway, I had gotten out of that when my dad was still alive, went through a divorce, which was hard on my parents. And then with my accident, and the accident that was before the divorce, and my losing my career and all the pain I was in, it was very upsetting to my parents. They weren't angry with me. They were just hurt for me. They wounded for me because of what had happened to my life. And, trying to rear 3 children, and it wasn't easy. And they were very compassionate about all that. But I was concerned about the Catholicism and how my dad had taken it. And it was probably 2 weeks after I had that session of weeping, or maybe even sooner. I had this lucid dream, and my dad was in it. First, though, I came into a room, and there was a dining table, and there were places set very nice place settings, except on one end, at the foot end, was just a plain white plate. And we were ushered in, and I was seated at that end of the table with this plain white plate. And then everyone was being served. I didn't recognize the other people at the table. I just knew I was at this banquet table, this table, and that I'd been given a very simple place, and that was fine. And what I was served was just a plain ear of corn, roasted corn. The leaves were off of it, just this plain ear of corn at my place. Everyone else was being served, lavish meal and all. But it was, I was fine with it. I didn't know where I was. I knew it was something very special. I wasn't bothered that that was all I was served. I noticed it, that was what I was served, and that my plate was different than the other plates. It was very, very plain. And other people were along the sides of the table. Someone of great importance was going to be up at the head. I was at the foot, at the base. And then from there, I was walked through like a room beside, or a hallway kind of thing. And there was this partition, a glass wall. And I looked across, and a screen with it, a screen. And my dad was there. And he was sitting there, and he looked at me, but he couldn't speak to me. And I couldn't speak to him. We had this partition. And the screen there even sort of obscured him slightly, and me to him. But I could see him smile with the biggest smile. It was like he was bursting with pride at me. And I just touched, it just got me so deeply, how happy and how proud he was of me. Even though I was at the foot of that table, he had seen where I had been, because it was opened up into this hallway that I went through. And then I had just this little ear of corn on my plate. But he was proud as punches, as all get out. And that was really the first time that I had other people come, that I recognized that that he, that there was this partition, that we were separated, and that he couldn't speak to me and I couldn't speak to him. And I understood from that he was in purgatory still. And then I put together from past times with people, before I understood purgatory even, that the times there had always been some kind of a partition, or the person who was in heaven could look at me or speak directly. Or if I were in a not good state, though, one time my cousin, who had passed over years ago, he just took my hand and someone else's and walked me in to a room. And it was actually behind the sacristy, behind an altar, where he took me, and with this other person. And it was in a time where I wasn't in a right place in my life with a situation. And my cousin was showing me that I wasn't, and I knew I wasn't. But he didn't say anything, but he could have spoken, and he could look at me. I knew he was in heaven, and he had the capability of showing me things, of showing me what I was doing wrong and that I needed to get out of it, which I already knew. So I knew he was in heaven. He had like an angelic presence about him. He wasn't an angel, but he had a position and was clearly present, no partitions. And so I knew he was in heaven. But with my dad, that was the first indication that I consciously was aware that when you're not fully in heaven, not in the fullness of light, there will be some kind of a partition or an inability to speak, or you can look directly at the person but not speak, or there's going to be some kind of a hindrance of a full interaction. But I was just so thrilled that my dad understood and that he was very proud of me that I was able to be at that table. And I mentioned it to a priest in confession one time, and I was sort of laughing how I was, had this plain ear of corn, and he says, "You need to be thankful that you were even at the table." And I realized, yes, I had the lowest position, I had the humblest plate, I had the humblest little ear of corn, and but that I was invited to the table even. And that's, I think, why my dad was so pleased that I had a spot at the table. And I thanked God for that. I stopped sort of joking around about it. I knew I had been humbled. And that's always sort of a fun thing. At least to me it is. And I liked all the imagery and everything. But what I guess I had focused on was how proud my dad was of me. And that took away my tears and my upset, that I understood where he was then, that he could see that Catholicism wasn't horrible, that he was very proud of me, even with being going to be a hermit, which I did remain a hermit. That didn't change that I got out of that hermit community. I just understood, and God 3 or 4 times additionally made very clear to me he did not want me a canonical hermit or a canon law hermit. I was to be his hermit, nothing in between us, no other structures between. I was God's hermit, and none others. No bishop, no in-betweens. To be a traditional historic hermit of the types from the way back, from the very beginning of hermits, even in the Old Testament. So between myself and God, a hermit. So that was when, so then the next time I saw my dad was about 6 months later after he had died to earth. And I was sort of thinking through, how long he would be in purgatory or something. But of course, it doesn't matter because God's timeless. And when we are going to be in purgatory or in progression, in process on the other side, it won't be a matter of time that we will know time, hours and days and things. But I sort of kept track. So I had another lucid dream. And in it, I was in my hometown walking along with my 2 older sisters and my mother. My mother was yet alive, and my sisters were. And we were all walking along and heading one way into town. And it was symbolic. And in this place called the Sunken Gardens, we were right by this Sunken Gardens, beautiful quarry area that had been created and dug out, and all these gardens grew in there. The town made the park into a park, made it into a park years and years ago. We were walking along, and my sisters and mom were all talking, and my dad came by us, going the other direction, out toward the cemetery, symbolism. But he was bathed in light, my dad was, with his angel. His guardian angel was with him, walking him out. And my mother and sisters couldn't see him, but I could see him and saw his angel. And I turned and watched them as they walked, and I knew the way my dad was bathed, he was illuminated by light, and his angel beside him, his guardian angel, and I knew it was his guardian angel. I knew my dad was being taken into heaven. that he had gone through his purification. He was illuminated with such glorious light, and being walked, his guardian angel was leading him, and because our guardian angels take us from birth to, or from conception, are to be with us and guide us through and lead us on and to the point where we are perfected and in heaven, where we no longer need a guardian angel to guide or help us in life or in the progression through purgatory. And I turned and I was so excited for him. And I just called out, "Dad, Dad." And he turned and looked at me, and I gave him this big thumbs up. And I said, "Way to go." I was, and that wouldn't be normally me, but I was just so overcome by excitement of joy. And he turned back, and on they went. And I knew he was in heaven. I knew he was in heaven. And I thought, well, it took about 6 months of our time, Well, then the next time I had a visit from my dad was on serious business. My mother, meantime, had been found to have very severe pulmonary fibrosis. Lovey, no. You be quiet. You wait. I'll be done soon. And it was about the last weekend in September of 2003. My dad had died in 2001, and he was in heaven by 2002, that spring. So it was about a year and a half later. I saw my dad through inner sight, but yet he was come in the front door of my house. I lived on a street called Warren Street. It was an older house. And he was dressed in a suit. He had his briefcase. I knew he was there on business, to see me on business. And I felt his presence that entire weekend, but he didn't talk to me until Sunday afternoon. And I knew my sisters had been out trying to help my mother. I had gone out trying to help her. She didn't want help, and she did not want to come back to be in a nursing home yet. And I had talked my sisters into just letting it go. I said, let her come to her own time. She will. She'll come to a point when she'll be ready to come back. But she was getting more and more ill with this lung disease, which doctors could only, she wasn't a smoker ever, that she must have been exposed to asbestos as a child even. It can remain latent in the lungs. And she was getting worse and worse with it. And my sisters were increasingly worried. And I said, don't worry. She had an apartment in an assisted living area. She had friends there. They had nurses. They had a director. If she didn't show up for breakfast or lunch, I guess she had lunch with groups of people in the dining room, they would know. Because my one sister was afraid she would fall and just lay there. I said, well, at most it would be maybe an hour that she would lay there if she fell in the morning when she got up. And I said, God will take care of her. Don't worry. We have to let her come to this on her own. We can't push her. And because she wouldn't. She wasn't the personality that you could convince. She had to come to it herself. So I said, just wait. And so my dad was there that third week in September at my house. And Sunday afternoon, he wanted to talk to me. So I remember where we sat. I was sitting on the side of a bed. I was actually sleeping in my son's bedroom. He was a sophomore in college then. And I had slept in his room on a twin bed because I was working on the master bedroom in there, painting it and doing things. So, or finishing it up, doing some work in there. So I was sitting on the side of the bed. It was in the afternoon, and my dad came in that room and sat down in the chair that my son had used to work at the computer and stuff. It was actually a chair that my dad had put together as part of a dining room set that when I had been divorced, I didn't have the dining set, so I didn't have the little table and chairs, the kitchen set. So he had put it together for me and stained it and everything. So he sat on that chair. I sat on the side of the bed, and he said three things to me. The first thing he said was, "You don't belong to that world." And he sort of nodded and looked directly out into the, what would be out into the street, out into the world. And actually, right across from me was St. Mary's Church, the church that I had last gone to. I think at the time I was going to maybe I was going back there. Things had gotten worked out after the soup kitchen fiasco, and I was scapegoated out of that. But I was able to go back to church there again. My spiritual director at the time that I had been wronged said, "You're not going back there until the priest apologizes or speaks." Well, he never apologized to me, but he did speak. So I went back then to that parish. But my dad also indicated that I don't belong to that world, meaning the active world of the temporal world I didn't belong to, or the active and also the active world of parishes. You don't belong to that world. And that was quite something coming from my father, because on earth he didn't understand I was different and that I had this spiritual aspect to me, but he was indicating then that yes, he did know that, and that I didn't belong to that world, the temporal of anything really. And he then said, "You need to start using your head." That's my dad. And I think maybe he hasn't come since, because I don't, other than in short little things he would say. But I don't use my head. I don't have a good temporal head on my shoulders. I try to do my best with decisions. I pray. I try, and invariably something happens. But I knew he was right. I had to start using my head as far as the parishes go, and in other aspects of my life. Just use common sense. Even though I don't belong to the world, to try to use my head. Then the third thing he said was, "I'm going to start helping with your mother." I had been praying, asking God, "Dad, help with Mom, help get her turned around. Help her to accept to come back to the nursing home here." It was a very nice nursing home in the town. She had her one living sister left in that town, and a friend, a longtime friend. Her husband had been best friends with my dad. They had been best friends all their adult lives. And my dad had been best friend with his best friend since he was 3 years old. So there was connection in that town for my mother. She had wanted us to go out there, wanted me to go out there, and I had tried that, but it didn't work out. My mother didn't really want me out there helping. And that was back in the summer before, so I came back and to check on everything with my son being alone from seeing him after college, his freshman year in college, and checking on things, or maybe it's his sophomore year, whatever. And in the meantime, then, that week that I had planned to be back, riding herd on the son a little bit, making sure, he was doing all he was supposed to be doing and taking care of the house, which he hadn't done a good job with that. But my mother, in the meantime, had told this director where she lived that she didn't want me to come back, that I interfered with her friendships. Well, yes, I'd had an experience that I'd told her about of one of her friends. I didn't know it was one of her friends. It was a dream I had. But it was very bad and evil. And I told my mother about the dream. She says, if you ever see that woman in your life, you need to stay away from her. Well, within an hour of my telling her of the dream, the woman was at the door of her apartment. And I opened it up, and there was that woman who had been in my dream I had just told my mother about. This evil woman. And after the woman had visited with my mother, it was part of her New Age group. Left, I told my mother, I said, that woman's the woman of my dream. Well, that upset my mother, put her in conflict. My mother trusted me and trusted my dreams and knew that I had this spiritual element, and she had a spiritual element. She was more open than my dad to the spiritual. By far, they were on different levels. And, but it upset her because she felt then that I was interfering with her friendships with these New Age people. Well, yes, I was. I didn't mean to, but I had to be honest with her. That was the evil woman in my dream that my mother had just said, if you ever see her in life, you need to stay clear of her. So my mother was conflicted. My mother knew truth, but she was allured and deceived by the devil into this New Age stuff. So, my dad, though, had come that weekend, and he says, I'm going to start helping with your mother. So I knew my dad was going to work it out to somehow get my mom to finally agree to come back where I could go every day to the nursing home and be with her and help her in her final months or year or however long she had left. It wasn't going to be much. The doctor said it wasn't going to be long. And after my dad said, I'm going to start helping with your mother, he just sort of gazed off. He had blue eyes, and they were a beautiful, rich blue. His eyes went even more blue. They started to sort of swirl, and it became like the ocean. His eyes swirled and became like the ocean, opened up to the ocean, and he just dissipated. My dad just dissipated in that bedroom. But the last thing I saw were his eyes just becoming this swirl of ocean blue, deep, deep, deep. And he was going back to heaven. Because I knew he was in heaven because he was talking to me directly. He had come right in to the house that Friday late afternoon to spend the weekend and had that suit on. He had all the symbols of he was there for business with me. And he didn't say a word or anything until Sunday afternoon. And that's what he said. So in the meantime, I had made arrangements, or after that I decided to go on a pilgrimage to pray for my mother's soul and for her to come back to Christianity. And only one daughter knew what I was doing, and she was to call my mother, because my mother would call me quite a bit from where she was in Arizona, and I was back in the Midwest. So I told this daughter, I said, you call her. And my daughter was in Arizona at the time. That daughter was. And I said, just tell her that I've gone on some kind of, I didn't want her to know that I was going on this pilgrimage because I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I didn't want my mother to worry because I was going to try something that was going to really press my body beyond what it could temporally really do. But I'd read about this pilgrimage that a priest in the diocese was having to Rome, to different places in Italy, Florence, Assisi, and to Rome. Those were the main places. And Venice. all to different sites. Oh, and to Siena. I would get to see where Catherine of Siena had lived and her church and everything. And other people that I knew about that I'd been reading about, different mystics. And so I signed up. The priest even helped me pay for it because I didn't have the money. And because he wanted me to go also, because I was doing it as a pilgrimage for my mother to get her back to God and to Christ. And that came after my dad had been there that weekend. It was probably 2 weeks later. The pilgrimage was the 1st of November for about 8 days. So my daughter was going to ride interference with my mother and tell her, if there's anything important, just to call the daughter, her granddaughter, that I had needed a week of quiet. I guess that's how we were going to put it. A week of prayer and quiet. And that I wouldn't be answering the phone. And I miraculously made it on that. I had no medication, Tylenol, and Aleve. I'd gotten put onto Aleve then, and Aleve helped me a little bit, but nothing if I was going to have a pain siege. And every church I went to, that was my goal, to pray at every church, at every shrine, at every anything that had religious significance, that I would pray for my mother to come back to Christ and to leave that alone, and also to cooperate and to give up wanting to stay out there, because we had a cousin who lived out there, and the cousin was getting worn out. My mother, when she wasn't feeling well, it was getting harder. The responsibility was weighing heavy on this cousin who took things very seriously and had a nervous disposition herself. My mother didn't have a nervous disposition. My mother was very strong-willed, and very productive person in life, intelligent, and but wasn't about ready to give up what she wanted. So I made it back, and it was maybe a week after I had to recover from that. It was a difficult trip for me, but I made it. I got a phone call from my mother saying, I'm ready to come back. I'm ready to come back. I knew my dad had worked on Mom, had helped her to turn it around. So Mom was willing to come back and bought airline ticket for me and for my sister, my next oldest sister. The oldest sister couldn't come at that time, and we got out there, got Mom all packed up, and the rest of everything done in about 4 days' time. And got her back on a plane. Had to make special arrangements because of her oxygen, so a cousin and her husband picked her up in a major city hub, and I had parked my car at a smaller airport, so I knew, and I felt Dad also. When we got there, because Mom said she was ready to come back, but there was a lot left to be done, and to reassure her that she was doing the right thing. But right before my sister and I were walking into her apartment, my dad said something to me within me. It was my dad's voice. And what he said to me right outside of her apartment door in Arizona, when we walked in, my mom wanted further reassurance. And I told her, I said, Dad, just now before we stepped in, before my sister and me stepped in your apartment, Dad said something to me. And he wants you to do this. And my mom says, well, what did he say? I need to know if it was really John. That's my dad's name. It's really him. So I told her what he had told me. And she goes, that's him. I'll go. I'll go. So about 4 days, 5 days later, we were on a plane and got her back into a hotel and then into the nursing facility. She had to be screened by a doctor first and all that. So got everything set up. And Dad had helped with Mom. And my sisters were like dumbfounded how it all just unfolded. But I couldn't tell them about my inner life. They wouldn't have believed it. It would have been off-putting to them. My oldest one, I think, would have, oldest sister. But I just knew just to keep it to myself. And this is the first time I've shared it with anyone. And I knew Dad was in heaven because I'd already seen him a year and a half before being taken to heaven by his guardian angel in a metaphor for me to understand in symbols of the town, heaven, but by the fullness of light that he was radiating and radiated in light. And the angel beside him, I knew. And then this next time he came, he was, I could see him, he could see me, he could talk to me directly. He looked right at me, spoke. There was no screens, no nothing between us. And and since then, though, it's just been words. And I really feel terrible because I think that, and I shouldn't feel that, it's probably my own. We're not to have guilt, I've asked God to forgive me all my stupid decisions I make, but I make them with such good intentions. I'm just not cut out for the temporal world. But I do think I have a man coming to help with some stuff. He's one that worked for me before. He's fast. He knows what he's doing. He's an artistic temperament. He's a little bit psychotic, to tell you the truth. He had terrible temper tantrums here. He, on 3 or 4 occasions, kept asking me for some medicine of mine. That's a big no-no. Of course, I didn't give it to him. And I just sort of laugh it off because, and he wasn't insistent, he wasn't angry or anything like that with it. But he knows you don't do that. It's against the law. But I would just sort of joke out of it and hid everything. But he's agreed to come back. He had a big fit over something that he didn't like that I wanted to do differently. It's my house after all, But he's got that kind of temperament and he's got issues. He's a born Catholic, big, huge Catholic family from back east somewhere. And anyway, he's going to come back. He apologized for how he acted. And we'll just take it from there. But maybe in a couple of weeks he'll come and we'll start working on the master bath. Because I can't do it. My body can't do it anymore. Can't do a lot of the work. Anyway, Dad hasn't. That's an example of maybe it's a bad thing to do, but I can't afford these other people. They just overcharge terribly. They look at me and take advantage. I don't have that kind of money. And I shouldn't have gotten this house to begin with, to think I was going to work on it. I should have been doing what my spiritual Da had said. And be doing my reading of my good books and writing. But I thought, oh no, I'll get something good exercise. Forces me to get exercise. And it will. I'm getting better. I get up and I start cleaning up things at least. But Dad hasn't been back in person to me. And other than telling me things, like when things were not going well with this one daughter, he said too much water over the dam. And it was true. That was the daughter that was the last one to let go of. And I had trouble letting go. Too much water over the dam. He was telling me it's not coming back. That friendship you had with her before is not coming back. The water's over the dam and on down the river. on down the reservoir. And that's been the case. And I understand now for what reason. My kids need their freedom. The thought of me and the interaction with me reminds them of all the suffering they had growing up, and it's too much for them. So they burned out. They burned out on having a suffering parent to worry about. And so that, and he's told me a couple other things, wisdoms that he would say, but I've not seen him. And I guess that's okay. I just myself have this concern, and I have had still, that I have disappointed him. And I don't know, I shouldn't have that, I suppose. I'll pray about that for me. I'll pray about it too. But I don't know. I mean, he was always so good with finances and practical decisions, and here I am. This has cost so much more. The inflation has happened, 35% higher in costs across the board in the past 3 years in this new government. I've had things go wrong here that I wasn't anticipating, of course, and so I'm getting down fund-wise. I'm getting down. I've gone through the inheritance. Not totally. I still have enough to hopefully pay for this man to help me get this place finished. But that's my experiences with visits from Dad, and it was very profound. I will have to say it was very profound, all of it. And it did give me this understanding. And then with my mother, visits from her, I'll do another time. I have this understanding of how it is on the other side, and how they can come and help us. And we will know if they are still in progression or in heaven when they come, based on if there's some kind of a screen, or they can't look at us directly, or they can or can't speak to us directly, or if their head's down and they can speak, but there's always some kind of an interference if they aren't in pure love yet, if they haven't come to heaven, to union with God. So, okay, God bless His real presence in us, and let us continue striving, doing all we can to cooperate and to correspond our efforts with the will of God in progressing us in this life as far as we can possibly help with our souls to love, to learn to love, and cooperate with the divine will totally, so that when we die in this life, we will have made good use of the time God gave us in loving God, in loving others, and in loving creatures and nature and life. Love your life. Have a good afternoon. Thanks.